Attend a majority white upper class school. Recently we had a hood rat day as a senior spirit day. To be expected, some were wearing cornrows, huge baggy pants, and athletic shoes. This seems to fit the lower class white and black stereotype. I found this in poor taste. You mentioned that we should focus on destroying systemic racism, classism. Should I just deal with this? Or is there a way I could tell my classmates this is offensive without coming on too strong? Now my answer is come on strong.
You know, yeah, and that would be my impulse too, but I think that you know, we want to do two things, right? One is we want to raise the level of consciousness around the unacceptability of these kinds of parties or events, whether they're the Hood Rat Day or whatever, or whether it's blackface parties on college campuses, which every year white folks seem to think that that's acceptable. Every year somewhere, white students, sometimes fraternities and sororities, sometimes not, will find it totally unobjectionable. Let's just paint our faces black, put on afro wigs, wear some gold chains, walk around with 40-ounce bottles of malt liquor and have a party. Like they think this is fun and not at all offensive. Or, you know, pimp and hoe parties or ghetto parties or whatever, right? All of these things. And you hear about them year after year after year. And kids keep putting the pictures up on Flickr and on Twitter and on Snapchat and all this stuff like it's nothing. There are obviously two types of people that do that. And we have to distinguish between them because our response has to be different depending on who they are. There are the obviously racist people who do that really as a macro aggression. I wouldn't even call that a micro aggression. That's a macro aggression. Those are the folks that do that kind of stuff when they know full well what's going on. You know who some of these folks are, the ones who have these parties like on MLK Day. So there have been some of these, like on college campuses where on MLK Day, so-and-so fraternity will throw a ghetto party. Like that's not at all subtle, and they know that's the day that they're doing it. So for those folks, ignorance is not their reason, right? But then there's another, and for those folks, I think we have to be tough and uncompromising. I think for those folks, we have to have accountability in the form of real discipline. I think for those folks, they've created an unsafe environment for people, a hostile environment. They have to be removed from that environment until they can change and acknowledge their error and their pain that they caused.
That's right.
Now there's a second group, and I think the second group is probably larger. I could be wrong about that, but I think that it's probably larger, and as ridiculous as it sounds, this is where we are as a culture. That I think a lot of folks, overwhelmingly white folks, but even sometimes folks of color, don't really understand the symbolic violence of the term hood rat or the misuse of the term ghetto, or, you know, if you knew how ghettos, quote unquote, had been constructed, you wouldn't make fun of them. Because ghettos are not the product of the people who live there, they're the product of the people who don't. They were created by people as holding pens, they are virtual concentration camps that were created for the poor. They may not have walls, they may not have fences, though sometimes they do, right, in certain communities, and it's really a distinction without a difference. If you knew that, but see, I don't think people know that. There are a lot of black and brown folks don't know that. That don't know the history of how the ghetto, so to speak, became constructed, or how the hood got constructed. So we have to educate and amplify what is true. Same thing with blackface. I mean, who really in this country went to a school where you learned about that? Now, black folks sort of know the history because it might have been taught to you by family. You might know that that was a form of entertainment that was used deliberately by white working class people to denigrate the intellect of black people. But I don't know any white people who learned that in school. I haven't met one that was taught that in school. Now, maybe you had an extraordinary teacher that talked about it, but I didn't learn about it. I took AP history. That wasn't in there, right? So if I didn't learn about it at home, if I hadn't known about that, and well, I only knew about it because my dad was an entertainer. My dad was a stand-up comic and an actor, so I knew the whole history of entertainment, good, bad, and otherwise, because it was drilled into me, but hey, who knows that stuff? So we have to, I think, go to the principal, go to the teachers, go to the other students who are also bothered by this, and ask for some time not to attack folks, unless we know they were doing it deliberately to be provocative and insulting, in which case they got to be critiqued harshly, but go and say, look, we just want a little bit of time that we can address this. We're not going to attack people. We're not going to assume the worst about them, but people need to know this. People need to understand this. And I think if we do it in that spirit and we try to say, look, there's some learning that needs to happen here, then we can move forward. Because I think for the most part, people who do that are operating out of the kind of ignorance which is not, I don't want to confuse ignorant with innocent. They're not innocent. There's a lot of blame to go around, but it's a structural and systemic blame. The system set them up to not know the truth. The system created that ignorance. We have to fix that system.
Right.